Hello, I'm Franklin Parrish, Senior Director of Brand, Marketing, and Creative Services at Kaiser Permanente Mid-Atlantic. I lead consumer marketing, brand advertising, and content for a healthcare system with over 700,000 members. I also teach the content strategy course for integrated marketing communications here at Georgetown. I'm thrilled to take this time to guide you through an exciting way of developing strategies that are easy to communicate and follow. As marketers, we're asked to develop strategies all the time. No matter how well your company is performing, we never have enough resources to do everything we'd like. And so that's why it's so important that all of our activities align to an overall goal. That can make for a more fuel-efficient organization. Now, what I've found is that strategic development can be time-consuming work, and once you're done, gathering buy-in from executives and stakeholders can be difficult if they don't have a marketing background. So let's get started exploring how you can make your strategies easier to develop and sell. Let's start with a basic definition. Strategy. It's a plan chosen to bring about a desired future, such as achieving a goal or solving a problem. And it's the art and science of planning and marshaling resources for their most efficient and effective use. Your strategy must define your goal and the means to get there. So, what does a good strategy look like? It's relatively straightforward to define strategy in a vacuum, but nobody operates in a vacuum, do they? In our matrix organizations, you might be responsible for developing strategy, but you might not have control over or visibility into how that strategy is implemented. Large organizations have specialized departments, so not having in-depth knowledge about how that department operates could be a barrier to providing any sort of meaningful tactical direction. On top of your own personal knowledge, you also have to depend on the understanding and buy-in of independent actors to realize a successful strategy. Marketing, sales, product development, fulfillment, each business unit within an organization must understand their individual part in pulling off a good strategy in the most efficient way possible. Some questions you can ask yourself about your strategy to tell if it can be successful. Is it scalable, relatable, realistic, focused, flexible? If you can answer yes to these questions, then you're well on your way to having a sound strategy that can be efficiently and effectively acted upon. So why do strategies fail? There are a number of reasons why strategies fail, but here are three key causes that I've identified. Planning. The strategy is based on faulty interpretation of data. Understanding. The strategy is not fully understood or internalized by all who need to execute it. And flexibility. The operational environment changes and the strategy fails to change with it. Let's look at a couple quick examples. I'll skip planning since we all know that the wrong assumptions will destroy even the most well-crafted strategy, and focus on understanding and flexibility. As I mentioned earlier, it's more efficient for business units, especially in large organizations, to act independently to achieve certain common goals. And we have all heard of instances where strategies fail because one business unit did something that ran counter to the collective strategy and then damaged the entire organization. An example of one of these situations is DiGiorno. In 2014, the hashtag #WhyIStayed became popular as a show of support and means of storytelling for victims of domestic abuse. Unfortunately, the social media team at DiGiorno didn't get the memo and tweeted out a reference to staying because there was pizza. Though arguably an innocent mistake, the remark came across as ignorant and insensitive, landing the company in hot water on social media. This mistake also significantly damaged the company's positioning and brand strategy as a family-friendly, non-controversial brand that everyone likes. Of course, sometimes we can spend lots of time developing a strategy and then through no fault of our own, the market shifts, and if we haven't built in the mechanisms to adapt quickly enough, the strategy must be abandoned. Or in the case of Kodak, the strategy is not abandoned soon enough. Kodak developed the digital camera long before any of its competitors, but failed to recognize that this represented a paradigm shift in the way that photos were going to be taken. Well, okay, Kodak did recognize the importance of the digital camera, but they were too fearful that digital cameras would cannibalize their current business, which was aligned to film production. So to avoid what they saw as shooting themselves in the foot, they failed to make the shift and killed the idea. So by the time the company leadership realized that the strategy of continuing to rely on film was a failing one, it was too late to save the company. So how can we ensure that our strategies are understood, internalized, flexible, and actionable? The answer is simple. Tell a good story. There's a reason great leaders and teachers in human history have been good storytellers. Stories capture the imagination, help build alliances, and spur people to action. So it's no surprise that the reason storytelling is so powerful is that it's grounded in science. The human brain is biologically hardwired to use storytelling to process and internalize critical information and to bond with other humans. That's why it makes all the sense in the world for marketers to harness the power of storytelling in articulating a strategy that will guide decision-making and align stakeholders internally and motivate customers to act. Klaus Fogg, in his book Branding Through Storytelling, shows how you can use a story structure to articulate strategies so that they can be more clearly grasped and internalized. This is why CEOs like to tell stories about the future of their businesses. It's so their business units can then retell that story or articulate the strategy through the lens of their areas of responsibility and bring the strategy closer to those who need to execute against it. Using the story framework is a great way to get people to relate to and see themselves as part of a successful strategic framework. And here's an example that you might remember. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first man-made satellite into Earth's orbit. This shocked the West out of a sense of technological superiority, and it was followed by a number of achievements from the Eastern Bloc that caused panic in Western capitals. Winning the space race would make the Soviets more influential with non-aligned nations whose loyalty the U.S. was in fierce competition for. Enter a brash young president who proposed the impossible. Let's take a look.
We shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, capable of standing heat and stresses several times more than have ever been experienced, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, carrying all the equipment needed for propulsion, guidance, control, communications, food, and survival on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere at speeds of over 25,000 miles per hour, causing heat about half that on the temperature of the sun, almost as hot as it is here today, and do all this, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first before this decade is out, then we must be bold.
We recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, and his speech still stirs. I'd like to take a moment, though, to highlight what he said later in the video. Kennedy mentioned the following. Did you catch all of it? A 300-foot tall rocket made of alloys that had yet to be invented on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, equipped with everything we need to take a person to the moon and back safely. Wow. I'm always struck by the scale of what he was asking, and it sounded like an unattainable dream, but it wasn't, because we did it. As a matter of fact, over the next 10 years, the U.S. spent about 2.5% of total GDP on the Apollo program, or $25 billion in 1960 dollars. That translates to about $150 billion today, and incidentally, it's more money than we spent on the Panama Canal and the Hoover Dam combined. The program enjoyed near universal public support. Ask anyone of a certain age where they were when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. They'll be able to tell you. So why did it work? Kennedy told a story that fits a formula that I use frequently, one I'm about to show you. So let's begin with the pillars of a good story. 1, you need characters. They are the elements of the story that drive the action. 2, you need conflict. This is where tension stems from as the characters struggle to resolve their differences. And 3, the plot. This is the progression of story events, which is vital to the audience's engagement. So who or what are the characters? In Fogg's fairy tale model framework, they are as follows. The hero. Every story needs one. The hero is driven by a passion to achieve a goal and possesses traits that align to a set of values. The goal sets up a contrast between the current world and the desired future, framing the conflict. The adversary represents the obstacle between the hero and victory. The beneficiary benefits from the hero achieving her goal. Often the beneficiary and the hero are one and the same. The support helps the hero to reach the goal. These tools can be physical or conceptual, like a hammer or the ability to speak French. The benefactor is invested in and willing to support the hero in fulfilling the goal. And so here's my take on the characters for the Apollo program story. The beneficiary is the West, led by the US, who would reap the scientific and economic rewards and bragging rights for being the first to land on the moon. NASA is the hero of this story, including the brains of the engineers and the courage of the brave astronauts. The adversary is the USSR, dominating space and the world as a result. The goal? Beat the Russians to be the first to land on the moon. Who's the benefactor? The US taxpayer and the American people at large. And finally, funding and a positive public opinion are the support. Once the characters have been identified, the next component of a successful story is the conflict that will make the story compelling and cause the listener to care. If there's no conflict, there's no story. To quote Fogg, the answer lies in human nature. As humans, we instinctively look for balance and harmony in our lives. We simply don't like being out of tune with our surroundings and ourselves. So as soon as harmony is disrupted, we do whatever we can to restore it. When faced with a problem, a conflict, we instinctively seek to find a solution. Conflict forces us to act. So conflict is not necessarily a negative, it's just an imbalance. The level of conflict needs to be proportionate to the level of effort that's required to restore harmony. And let's take a look at the conflict barometer that I've taken from the Klaus Fogg book. It can represent a hopeless situation where the hero is faced with a dilemma with no other choice but destruction. This is to be avoided. Or it may be a problem that the hero can easily solve. This is also to be avoided. In either extreme, chaos or business as usual, the conflict level is such that the audience either loses hope or loses interest. Neither of these options will make a compelling story that spurs the audience to action. For Kennedy, the conflict was existential. If we didn't get to the moon first, the USSR and its allies would overwhelm us in both technology and prestige. This, needless to say, was pretty high on the conflict barometer. Nothing less than a full-tilt national response was necessary to counter this threat, but you'll notice he didn't present the conflict as hopeless. As far-fetched as it sounded at the time, Kennedy provided us with a way to win. The final element is the plot, which is needed to drive understanding. Every good story and strategy needs a beginning, middle, and end. I have found the message map / business story, and I prefer business story, and that's what I'll call it from here on out, to be an invaluable tool in defining a plot. This model helps to give your story a sequential framework that makes it easier to understand and internalize. Here's a step-by-step illustration of how a plot unfolds using the business story and how it aligns to the fairy tale model. The middle section describes the audience you're referring or speaking to. The engagement message helps to set up the goal of the hero or the adversary that needs to be beaten. Defining the problem that the hero needs to solve is a great way to bring in your audience. The solution message tells the audience how balance will be restored. At this stage, the goal is acknowledged, the benefactor and beneficiary are introduced. The reinforcement message proves we can win through these specific elements of support. Now, your audience can get hung up here, so make sure that you're providing as much detail as is appropriate for whomever you're speaking to. The value message is how you describe what the world looks like after the hero has prevailed and why that's a desirable future. Let's apply this to the Apollo program. The Russians have beat us to space. We're at a disadvantage and the optics don't look good for the West. We're in danger of losing influence in the rest of the world. We have to do something bold to right the situation. A bold move, one that has never been attempted before, is what's needed to leapfrog the Soviets in both technology and influence. We need to go to the moon and not just land a craft. We have to send Americans to the moon and bring them back safely to demonstrably put the West ahead in the space race. We have the minds, the will, and the money to make this happen. A charismatic president will make this the mission of the entire nation, and we will devote whatever we have to win. This section of the speech that we viewed spells out that support very well. This achievement will be a lasting symbol of the Western Bloc on the ascendancy, putting the Soviets and their allies on the defensive. We'll enjoy increased influence over nations that aren't aligned and forge stronger relationships to contain communism's reach. At the beginning of the space race in 1961 and through 1969, America had a very clear story that drove the effort to reach the moon. This powerful story captured the nation's imagination. The structure is easy to understand once learned. There was no need to go back and study it. It was easy to memorize. The story propelled NASA's efforts for nearly 10 years, and the goal of landing on the moon was achieved. But what happened after that? When we landed on the moon, the fundamentals of NASA's story had changed and the story fell apart. When we landed on the moon, the job was done in the public's minds, and people lost interest in the program moving forward. The final missions weren't even covered live. What the Apollo program could have used to maintain public interest and funding after the first moon landing was a new vision of the future, and that would have required a shift in strategy. As I mentioned at the beginning of the story, a good strategy needs to be flexible and change when the characters in the story change. A story and a strategy is a formula. When applied correctly, you have a stable story, one that compels and instructs the listener to act. If you change even one of the variables, as happened in the Apollo program story, you have to examine the rest of the formula to make sure that there's still alignment between the remaining ones. Luckily, you can use the fairy tale model to look ahead and create a new strategy by telling a new story. In order to shift strategy, you need to devise a new vision of the future based on a new hero, beneficiary, adversary, and/or goal, and reestablish the relationships between them. Now, they don't all have to change. It's likely that your hero won't, and sometimes the only character that needs to change is the goal. But the rule is, examine and ensure the relationships are still valid if you do make any changes to your story. When you're communicating strategy through story, you know all the characters. When you're building strategy, you don't. So the construct goes as follows. A hero has a goal that will benefit someone or something overcoming an adversary. We need to know who has to do what in order to make the story true. When we know what the desired state is, the promised land, we can reverse engineer the other characters in the story, in this case, benefactor and support, to make the new story true and compelling. The graphic that's on screen shows us the promised land, the world we want to make real. And please recall the original definition of strategy, a method or plan chosen to bring about a desired future, such as an achievement of a goal or a solution to a problem. The combination of and the relationships between the hero, the goal, the beneficiary, and the adversary represent the promised land, what the world's going to look like if the strategy is successful. The hero defeated the adversary and accomplished this goal and brought about a better world. As you might remember, in order for the story to be true, we need to identify a benefactor. We also need to establish the conflict. Lastly, what's the sequence of events or the plot that the hero has to take to reach the goal? So this will be a good time to point out that there are many applications for the fairy tale model and the business story that I'll hereafter refer to as the story and strategy process. You can use it for value proposition development, content or creative strategy, customer strategy, brand positioning strategy, business strategy, team strategy, career strategy, or personal strategy. You can do that by following these straightforward, but I wouldn't characterize them as simple steps. 1. Define the imbalanced or the promised land. Identify the hero. Is it your team, your business, the consumer, your customers? Establish the goal. What is it that the hero wants to achieve? It can be specific or broad. Improve productivity, increase customer loyalty, boosted close rates, enhance the feeling of control. Identify the adversary. Complacency, losing market share, failing to meet sales goals. This can be nearly anything, but it shouldn't be your competition. The best strategies are proactive even when they're reacting to a specific event. Identify the beneficiary. This is usually the same entity as the hero, but make sure that that's the case. For example, a woman, hero, might purchase an insurance plan support to benefit her family, beneficiary, for example. 2. Brainstorm the support based on who the benefactor is in this particular story. And before I dive into this explanation, I can say that I've used this method with stakeholders all over my company, and no one has ever said this exercise is a waste of time. As a matter of fact, this is a great way to get the people that will help shape, execute, or enforce the strategy to buy in and take ownership. This brainstorming board is on the wall in my office. Think about what's needed to allow the hero to overcome the adversary and achieve the goal for the beneficiary. The beauty here that changing the benefactor only changes the support that the benefactor brings. The promised land doesn't change. This is particularly helpful when you're creating a business strategy with different business units contributing to it with the individual tools that they have to offer. For example, marketing will have different tools from supply chain management, but they can both substantially contribute to the overall business strategy. Sometimes a larger strategy needs smaller strategies or stories to support it. So you'll need to identify scalable support points and repeat until you have specific tasks to perform. For example, you have a marketing plan that seeks to grow your company's share of market. Let's take this story. The hero is your business. The goal is to grow market share by X%. Your adversary is stagnation, let's say. Your beneficiary is your business, and the benefactor is your marketing division. Now, the support that the marketing division will bring is the marketing plan and, let's say, a PR campaign. Each of these support points can be a strategy or story in and of itself. What is the strategy for the marketing plan, the product positioning, the PR campaign? You'll need to drill down to create new strategies or stories to make these support points true. Drill down to the specifics of your strategies until all you're left with are tactics. For example, the marketing plan will be supported by a digital media buy. That's a tactic that probably doesn't need further exploration. Someone just goes and buys the media based on the media plan, which itself is a strategy or story. Or perhaps you're leading a struggling sales team. Your job is to turn them into a team of winners. The support points that you could bring to the strategy are changing culture, improving environment, enhancing support, providing tools, etc. But you can't just say, I'll change the culture as if it's a single task or tactic. That takes a strategy and a good story that have their own support points and tactics. A good rule to remember that if it takes more than one tactic or action to make something happen, your best bet is to make them aligned to a strategy. 3. Set priorities and scope. Evaluate the support points for ROI, level of effort, and impact. Evaluate new information for its strategic value and alignment. As you inevitably face new demands or changes in direction, use the framework to take a look at the scope and ask yourself if the new activity will support the story. Once you have your specific support points identified in the method I mentioned earlier, then you've defined the scope of your strategy. Of course, time and situations change, and the story must change and evolve with them. The good news is that the Story of Strategy framework can help you facilitate that evolution. The Story of Strategy framework can be used as an effective diagnostic and decision-making tool as well. It will help you define what you will and won't do when new requests come in. An article from the Columbia Business School entitled "Strategy is an Art of Sacrifice" goes into a little more detail. Effective decision-making is fraught with difficulties. The world is changing and the future is uncertain. We will never have perfect information, and we are all prone to all manner of biases that can trip us up. But one crucial requirement of decisiveness is frequently overlooked: deciding what not to do. A decision is a choice between alternatives in service of a desired outcome. And the reality of limited resources make this a zero-sum game. Every additional thing we do subtracts attention and energy from everything else we do. Choosing a series of actions without any subtraction is just piling it on, which eventually will stifle an organization, blurring its focus and sapping its resources. So we've all been there. We've developed a strategy and worked diligently to get buy-in, and you're ready to execute. An email comes in from a higher up, and it starts something like this: what if we... If you're anything like me, your blood runs cold when these emails pop up in your inbox. But now you have a defense. Evaluate the request as follows. Does this propel the story? If so, do it and provide the rationale as to why. If it doesn't, push back and you have a solid justification. No one gets in trouble for evaluating a request through a strategic lens. Similarly, you can use this tool to decide priorities. Which support point will help make the story true faster? That can be your first priority. Or let's say resources are limited and you have support points that to make happen will cost more than you have. Then align the support points you tackle to your resource level. Let's see this in action for a project at Kaiser Permanente. So we had a member testimonial project that was designed to change the market's perception that we are a healthcare organization more concerned about the numbers than personalized care. Our marketing goal was to turn that perception on its head using glowing patient testimonials as support. We get written reviews all the time, but they're usually pretty generic. to support our strategy, we needed reviews that focused on how much patients like their individual doctors. We started our story as strategy process by first identifying the story elements. Our hero is the Permanente doctor. The goal is to reposition Kaiser Permanente as a healthcare system that goes above and beyond the standard definition of care. Our adversary are the negative impressions of Kaiser Permanente as a cookie-cutter healthcare provider. The beneficiary, obviously, is a Kaiser Permanente brand, and the support are member testimonials that are provided by our benefactors, the Kaiser Permanente members. The next step was to develop a story arc for these elements, and we created the following business story, so here goes. HMOs aren't known for delivering personalized care. Patients are just a number to them instead of an individual with unique needs. The only physician who will take the time and consideration to provide that kind of customized care you deserve is your family doctor. KP prides itself on having over 1,600 doctors across the Mid-Atlantic states who are dedicated to delivering the kind of compassionate care that makes our members not only feel better, but feel special. Every doctor says that they will care. Our members will testify that they love their Permanente doctors for the personalized care they provide just as much as you love yours. Great care starts with a great relationship. And at Kaiser Permanente, you'll have not only a doctor, but a hero, a friend, and a guide on the road to better health. Video testimonials are the most powerful, but we're faced with a decision that our story framework helped us to make. Because our project, like any other, had certain budgetary and time parameters on doing the testimonials as video, we decided that since some testimonials didn't deliver strongly enough on the individual doctor satisfaction support point, we weren't going to spend the time and money to film them. We could use another method to collect the members' thoughts. The story as strategy process helped keep us focused on what was most important. So my team and I have been using these tools for a number of years for almost every instance that requires a strategic approach. Whether it was deciding on how we were going to bring our digital production capabilities in-house, my staffing and organizational structure, or marketing, creative, or brand strategies, these are the tools that we always reach for. I hope that you'll find this helpful and useful as you're tasked with developing your strategies. And as you can see, developing strategy as a storytelling framework has been a powerful tool for Kaiser Permanente, and it can be the same for you too. By breaking down your marketing challenges into relatable characters who face and overcome them with the support of your products and services, you can be the hero to both your company and your customers. Thanks for your time.